The next thing I want to talk about, chat room, fighting game related, of course, right? We just finished talking about multiverses, which, you know, of course I'll be making a video and with some edits here and there. But this is like the one thing I wanted to like talk about for, you know, like Fei Long, right? Fei Long being the Street Fighter World Warrior rep that has always been in like most Street Fighter titles, right? Ever since like Street Fighter 2, he's always been like the Bruce Lee like fucking knockoff, right? He has like very eccentric and out forward Bruce Lee isms, you know, as of course, right? Bruce Lee was such like a worldwide sensation. Like everybody knows about this dude that like huffs and puffs and does like crazy fucking kung fu karate sort of shit. And Bruce Lee is like, no, sorry, Fei Long is like a close one-to-one representation of, you know, the iconic figure himself. And of course, you know, there are other characters, right, that have Bruce Lee centrics, right? Martial law and forest law being, you know, one of them, being like a few of them. But the funny thing is that there was a recent fucking interview. There was a recent like video about a Street Fighter V composer by the name of Daniel Lindholm. That's his name. He did like composition works for like Ed Steam and Gil Steam and so on and so forth. And he recently did a video, which, you know, I have not seen, right? But I just like saw like the news of it on like Eventhubs, which is what we're seeing at right now. There was a funny thing about, you know, someone asking about Fei Long, right? And when can we possibly see Fei Long return in a Street Fighter game? Because, you know, he's been absent in Street Fighter V. He was there in 4. We haven't seen a lot of this dude. He is a world warrior, right? And a world warrior represents, you know, a character in a fighting game that's been there since the beginning, right? Like, Faust is a world warrior because he appeared in the first Guilty Gear game on PS1, and he has been there. He has been in Guilty Gear throughout the Testament of Time. And same course with Fei Long, right? Fei Long has been a world warrior. Fei Long is a world warrior since Street Fighter 2, right? If I remember, the cast of Street Fighter 2 was Ryu, Ken, Chun, Blanca, Guile, Zangief, E Honda, Fei Long, Bison, Vega, Balrog, and Akuma. So like 12 fucking characters are in Street Fighter, right? OG like cast. But the funny thing that recently happened is that there's a particular reason that like Fei Long is not going to be in any new Street Fighter since like after like 4, right? He's not going to be there in Street Fighter 5, and most definitely not going to be there in Street Fighter 6 is because, you know, yeah, but Daniel Lindholm, a Street Fighter 5 composer, character that I know we won't see at all. There's been a lot of discussion about it. I mentioned earlier, a character I would like to rewrite the music for would be Fei Long. I do have other sources, not only Capcom, but friends of mine in the US who are very close friends with the Lee family, and they have basically said that any kind of resemblance to Mr. Bruce Lee is now omitted for comedic effect. Comic stuff. It needs to be honorable. That's why we won't see Fei Long again, ever, right? And then, of course, right, immediately afterward, Twitter, right, the official community group that honors everything about like Bruce Lee, said, "We never made any comments of this nature. We have no idea who Daniel Lindholm says his close friends of the family are, but his comments are entirely false surrounding the Bruce Lee family." This is like a small debate here and there, like, you know, who's right, who's wrong, like sort of shit, right? But this got me thinking, like, you know, let me do like a real talk like segment about this got me into like a kind of a talking mood, right? Fei Long is like categorized as a world warrior, right? Fundamental fighting game characters that created like the subgroup of fighting game like archetypes, right? You know, Ryu and Ken are considered the Shotos, which is derived from the fighting game term Shotoken, that usually is based on like fireball and like hurricane kicks and like shoryukens, right? That's what makes up a Tatsu. And then from Ryu and Ken evolved Sakura, Akuma, Goken, like they created like the basic bitch neutral model, right? You have this character that does essential things that what a Shoto does, right? Then of course you have like charge characters, right? Like Guile. Guile is definitely considered like the first like charge character because of instant flash kick and sonic boom and like just all the things that make like Guile the way Guile is. Then of course you have like the grapplers, right? Zangief. Zangief is like the grappler. He like is like the originator, the progenitor of like the grappler archetype of fighting games, right? And then of course you have like the dictators, and then you have the boss characters, right? So many different like archetypes within like fighting games, you know, as playable characters, right? Then you have like Fei Long, and Fei Long is categorized not only as like, you know, the rushdown. Of course, you know, some characters very much are like rushdown characters. Killer Instinct, for example, is a rushdown character because he could just like run at you super fast and gets up close in your face. That's what designates like a rushdown character. There's also Giovanna, that's also a rushdown character because of how Giovanna plays and how amidst the classic rushdown centrics, fast dash, you know, close buttons that like stop you from doing anything, good grabs and like all that stuff. That's what a rushdown is. But Fei Long is not only like a rushdown character, but also the kung fu archetype of fighting games. And kung fu is, you know, usually like, you know, Bruce Lee actions, right? There's also like the Rekka-ken style, right? You have Rekka-ken is like the OG move that Fei Long has, where he can like chain one special attack, which is like his punch, and it's a 3-part punch series, right? So you do Rekka-ken, 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 right? Strike fist, strike fist, strike fist, you know, all that stuff. And there are only like a few that come into mind as like the Kung Fu series, right? Bruce Lee, Makoto, Iron Fist from Marvel 3. What other Kung Fu characters are there in fighting games? So I know there's like a lot of like ninjas, right, in fighting games. Guy and Ibuki being essentially like one of them, right? There's also like the Thai classes like Sagad, the Muay Thai classes, sorry. Not the Thai class, Muay Thai. But, you know, those are like characters that are what like fighting game characters like are, right? In anime fighters, there's always like some person that's, you know, has a lot of different ranges, from like puppeteers to shotos to kung fu girls, right? These are fighting game archetypes that like, you know, define a certain character, and it's especially more so in like anime fighters, right? Because, you know, anime fighters have different traits about them, right? They have unique abilities that differ this character from another because they play so differently. No one character plays the same as the other unless you're talking about like a Street Fighter, or to an extent a KOF, right? KOF or even a Tekken, right? And to have like a character like Fei Long being absent in future Street Fighter products is kind of a little bit weird. Albeit, you know, the false claim was like, you know, we don't want to have Fei Long because, you know, we can't have a character who is like Bruce Lee, being used for comedic effects. It needs to be like, you know, honorable. Of course, that's at the point of contention, because, you know, recently we just saw that the Bruce Lee family responded, and, you know, that's entirely false. I don't know where he's getting this information from. But it begs the question, right, you know, should a fighting game like character like Fei Long, for instance, you know, be like considered in a fighting game, right? Because this whole like debacle, albeit, you know, we're not getting the whole picture of the story. We don't know whose information is in the right or in the wrong. Who's in the right, I'm sorry, not in the wrong. But yeah, like a fighting game character can only go so far, that to like not include him at all, right? For reasons, right? You know, K49s, right? The living like experiment of Kyo Kusanagi, right? During the time in Nest Saga, wasn't even like there in future KOF games, albeit, you know, there's 2002, but K9s came back as Cronin, but before Cronin ever like came along, right, K9s was there, and SNK kind of got into flack with Cronin because of, you know, K9s look exactly like a fucking character from a very popular anime film called Akira, and there is a character by the name of Tetsuo who pretty much looks like K49s with the cape and like the weird deformed head. So SNK was like, you know, a validated reason they had to like cut that off, otherwise they would have been like sued to hell from this company, and fearing like the backlash, they cut off K49s ever since, until KOF 15, where he was established with where he is now fitted with long hair, goggles, kind of similar cape, but, you know, in a different name. And so Cronin is back as K49s, but we all know as KOF and SNK fans, that's K49s. A character shouldn't be back. Character shouldn't like come back because, you know, well, Street Fighter has always been like the stereotype, hokey, goofy, like traditional footsie fighter, right? You know, it has always been like a stereotype fighter. You have a Russian guy being muscular and muscular. You have a blonde-haired, blue-eyed American man that throws out, you know, wind projectiles and does instant uppercuts, right? It is a fucking stereotype of a fighting game series, and it lives on to this day. It lives on to this day, right? Every character is like some sort of like stereotype, or like half of the roster is a stereotype that represents like a country here and there. When you have like a character like Fei Long that is like a homage but also like a stereotype, there can only be like so much that you can like allow or permit, right? You know, Fei Long being like a very rushed down heavy, like a very aggro style like kung fu character that Fei Long has always been like categorized in the Street Fighter games that he has been in. Like I remember, you know, I remember Pungo dominating with, well, was it like Pungo? No. I know it was like some FGC tournament player. This was like in the Evos that Street Fighter 5 have been in, right? And I think it was like someone versus Seth, and Seth was a really top tier character, right? He just had like so much access to like things. He has like the amalgamation of every different like fighter whatsoever, and he is like the boss character. A character like Fei Long, right? You know, if it's in like in the realms of like, you know, it's like a character who is the homage to like a certain real life character, can only be like taken so far to a degree, right? And, you know, it's understandable that like, you know, if some of y'all don't want to have Fei Long to be in the next Street Fighter because, you know, it's very rude or disrespectful to have like a character that is a Bruce Lee character that's just everybody knows about Bruce Lee, you know, the Wata, and you know, that's what everybody remembers Bruce Lee as, like, for a comedic stereotype type of like homage. You want to have like a character who's based on a real life dude or dudette and be done in a respectful and a tasteful manner, right? It's kind of like a fighting game character whose like archetype is like based on like the Kung Fu khaizakahn character, you know, like that. To me, I would argue that's like, you know, that's a staple, right? And Fei Long is Fei Long, and you can't replace Fei Long with another Kung Fu character, right? Like, sure, there's like Yun, there's Yang, there's Makoto, right? You know, we have all these other like Kung Fu characters that could definitely fit the role of, you know, Fei Long. And it's funny because, you know, thinking about it now, right? You know, martial law is also an homage to Bruce Lee, right? He does like yells, he does like dragon kicks, and you know what I also thought of as another homage to Bruce Lee? Liu Kang, right? Liu Kang is another Bruce Lee homage, right? It's just that Mortal Kombat can, I don't know, kind of like get away with that, right? But because it is based on like real life, you know, fighters, right? Real life practices and, you know, real ass fucking real ass fucking character outward appearances of, you know, shit like that. Like I know Mortal Kombat 11, the new face for Sonya is based off of like the rig of Ronda Rousey, right? The famous female MMA fighter. It's okay to not have like Fei Long because you don't want to have like a stereotype of a fighter, and you want to have like a character that is tasteful to the character that is, you know, represented, right? Bruce Lee is Bruce Lee because of like all the action movies, action kung fu flicks that he has done in his prime before, you know, his like his cause of death, which is like, you know, I read about this, like the swelling of the brain, you know. It's like sad for you know, Bruce Lee and the Bruce Lee family. Much respect and love to y'all. I agree with like not having a character that is played off as a character that doesn't represent the character in an honorable fashion. But you want to have a character that is true to himself, you know, like outside of like the Bruce Lee representation. Fei Long is Fei Long, right? There is like no character that replaces Fei Long. Like he's his own character. He's his own playstyle. He's the one that invented the khaizakahn, the fighting style that we all fighting game fans know and love, right? And again, sure, we have, you know, those other characters from my aforementioned ass, but it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel the same to have, you know, a similar Fei Long, you know, rep. You know what this reminds me of? It kind of reminds me of, you know, how Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was having their heyday with like their pre-launch, and there was like interviews and all that stuff. There was one particular interview that a game journalist had towards Peter Rosas, aka Combo Fiend, who was working at Capcom at that time, and he was asking about, you know, very PR sensitive questions that that Combo Fiend couldn't answer, right? And one of those questions was like, you know, where are the X-Men? Where's Fantastic Four, right? And Combo Fiend really much said about, you know, one character in particular, right? Magneto. You won't find Magneto in the game because Magneto is a function, right? Magneto is a function because he has an 8-way dash, right? If you want an 8-way dash, you can play Nova, and that just like one of those like cement the deal that like nobody liked MVCI at like launch. No characters that they love, graphics was like abysmal. Gameplay was super fire, but nobody liked MVCI. So it pretty much reminds me of like that interview with like Fei Long, right? You know, this is where I'm like going, like, you know, just because Fei Long is like a character that does like khaizakahns, that does like chicken kicks, that he does all the stuff that makes Fei Long, doesn't mean that, you know, Fei Long is like that type of character. Fei Long is Fei Long. He studied Bruce Lee films, I'm pretty sure, in like 4. He is an action star. He is like all these things, right? That's, of course, you know, that's what made Bruce Lee Bruce Lee. But Fei Long is like Fei Long. Fei Long is that character in Street Fighter history that does have these unique special moves that wasn't like other characters. He is a rushdown OG kung fu character, right? And of course, you know, we don't know the whole story behind, you know, this Street Fighter V composer and like this debate with the actual Bruce Lee family. But I'm pretty sure this will be like solved up or like patched out. But it is like an interesting discussion to like bring about. I like Fei Long. I practiced him out in like Street Fighter 4. He is a very fun like Bruce Lee character. I still like Iron Fist because, you know, that's like Marvel 3 and like characters can do so much nutty shit. But like, you know, Fei Long is cool, right? I like him. I wouldn't like toss it out as like he's a main of mine or anything, but he's one of those like fundamental characters that created like one archetype of a fighting game that, like, you know, people like toss around in like casual conversation. Fei Long is the kung fu khaizakahn character. He is the OG, and you can't like replace him with any other character. He is the one. He is the one.